Welcome to the Probate Realtor Show, your one source for selling and buying real estate through trust and probate. Hear directly from the best attorneys and trusted advisors on how executors and administrators navigate the probate process in and out of court. Being a personal representative or successor trustee can be a daunting task, and often beneficiaries don't have a clear plan. Let us help you make the right decision for your clients, your family, and your legacy. And now, here's your host, the probate realtor himself, Matias Baker Masucci.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode. Today, we are talking to a very special guest, a wealth advisor. We're talking to Andy Chong. Andy, welcome to the show.
Oh, well, thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure to have you. And let's start right away by educating our audience a little bit. Today, we're going to be talking about corporate trustees. So, Andy, what is the corporate trustee?
That's a great question. So corporate trustees, and I'll let you know, just kind of based on my personal history for working with corporate trustees, is the one big angle that I know in terms of corporate trustees are usually the banks. Mm-hmm. And banks typically do tend to act as a corporate trustee for where they take on a relationship where they're acting as kind of an independent arbiter or independent fiduciary for various personal trust relationships. The corporate trustees serves a really important role just because, like I said, they do act as an independent arbiter versus a family member, or I would say a friend or some other kind of personal contact that you have that might not be qualified to actually administer a particular trust or a fiduciary relationship. So corporate trustees are pretty valuable in terms of the role that they play. My personal experience with it has always been working within a private trust company. Mm-hmm. I've worked at Northern Trust for about 9 years, BNY Mellon for 3 years, and US Trust for about 3 years as well. And all of those are considered corporate trustees or large trustees that can help individual families and estates.
That's wonderful. I love the fact that you had experience in different institutions, so you got to see how different institutions administer a trust. So to kind of like just give it a bullet point, when you have a trust, you can have a successor trustee that will take care of once you pass away and somebody becomes in charge of the estate. What a corporate trustee does is essentially that successor trustee. Instead of having one person, you have a whole department. You may have a person assigned to you, but you have a whole department of a financial institution that becomes the trustee, the successor trustee. So something that you mentioned when we spoke about earlier, you said, these are irrevocable trusts. So what happens when a living trust is put in place and somebody, which we all familiar with it, when we do our estate planning, we have a living trust and we are the trustee, we are the trustor, we are the beneficiaries, we are the whole thing. But once the trustee passes away, the trustor, it becomes an irrevocable trust. And so you were dealing with irrevocable trust, right?
Yes.
So let me ask you these questions. Who needs a corporate trustee in your experience?
Yeah, that's a great question as well. And I would say a good majority of people with pretty sizable estates would probably need a corporate trustee. And the reason why I say that is just that usually if you name somebody else that's not qualified to handle large estates or where there's tons of investable assets or real estate properties and so forth, it could get really overwhelming and complicated for those individuals. They might not even have the expertise to handle, becoming a trustee and even the legal expertise and so forth. Corporate trustees are great because they have those built out teams that can handle those type of things. They are experts in their field. They usually have what they call trust advisors or trust administrators on staff. And they're experts in reviewing all of these trust documents and knowing all the different provisions to make sure that the trust and the estate is actually carried out in the manner that the trustor is wanted. So usually when it ends up in the hands of a family member, things can get really, I've seen negative situations where it divides kind of the family. It's just kind of a natural course of things when there's large, pools of assets or money at stake. And it's just a really, really sad situation when I see those situations when it could be avoided and have, like I said, a big institution kind of looking over everything.
I'm glad you actually brought it there. Thank you.
Yeah.
I wanted to talk to you about the disadvantages of, I don't want to use the word disadvantage actually. What I
Yeah.
want to use is that what are the challenges that people can run into when selecting a corporate trustee? Like what you've seen, in your experience with the beneficiaries, what can be the issue?
Absolutely. Like that's a tough situation too, because what ends up happening, and I was kind of in the front lines, working at these institutions for many years. I guess one of the advantages is that the institution or the bank actually ends up becoming the bad guy in a lot of times, instead of pointing the finger at, the family members or some family friend or like a spouse or an ex-spouse. Those things actually end up being one of the kind of the positive things is the institution kind of gets the brunt of a lot of the discontent, if there is. If there's a little bit of disputes among, with regards to the state. But I would say some of the disadvantages of a large institution is probably just kind of things that you hear about, when you are working with the, like the U.S. Trust and the J.P. Morgans and, all of these professional large corporate fiduciaries, is probably the fees are probably a little bit higher than it would be if you did have an independent CPA or an independent attorney tied to it. So that I would say that's kind of like the first and foremost. You are kind of purchasing, the name brand of these institutions, and they're not the most cheap. They're not the lowest cost providers out there. So I would say that's one of the disadvantages. I would say other disadvantages tends to be just sometimes the service offerings in terms of what they can oversee. When I was working in that world or that realm, it tended to focus on asset management and investable assets. And as we know in California, tons of wealthy individuals haven't made their wealth in the stock market. They sold a business or they own tons of real estate. Those are kind of the limitations that you see, is that it depends on the disposition of the asset base of the estate. And then, if it's a private entity with a lot of multiple kind of, I would say private placement investments or business interests, that could get complicating, and a lot of banks won't touch that because of the liability risk. In addition, these large corporate players, they do have stated minimums. They won't probably touch a $1 million estate. To the average person, $1 million estate is quite a bit of money. A lot of times they have very, very stated minimums of at least maybe $10 million or more that they'll actually, work on. So when you are setting up a trust or an estate plan, you have to be cognizant of that. You can't just name any of these, these institutions thinking that they'll accept the business and become a successor trustee. They actually have the discretion to say no. So.
Thank you very much, actually, for bringing that up. And this is an example that enters, my world. Some of the estates, a lot of these institutions, they don't want to become landlords. So if you have apartment buildings in your estate, you may want to make sure you find somebody who is interested. Now, having said that, if your estate is big enough, anybody will take it. They'll become landlord. They'll sacrifice it. It depends just, the magnitude of the estate. But generally speaking, you want to find somebody. There are private firms, that may be a little bit smaller. They still provide corporate trustee services. That may not be the J.P. Morgans and the Wells Fargo out there. They will take on, assets such as apartment buildings and things like that, and then do things accordingly. Now, let's move on exactly on and focus on what you do now, which is, you're a wealth advisor. And we know that in the world of probate real estate, a lot of the time, the beneficiaries end up inheriting quite a bit of money. This is California, this is Los Angeles. Some of these homes are worth in the millions of dollars, and they find themselves inheriting this much money, like a sizable amount of money. However, a lot of the times they don't have a plan, right? So tell us exactly what you do to help people who have, wealth to administer, essentially.
That's a great question. And for the most part, having a plan is probably the most important thing. So part of the situation that you run into with somebody that does inherit a sizable sum is probably taxes, understanding the tax implications, those assets that you're going to be inheriting. So that's the number one thing that I I tend to see. Anytime you see money in motion, whether it be a business sale or a real estate sale or inheritance, all of those things will have some type of tax consequences tied to it, whether it be capital gains or something else. But, understanding that, you are getting into this sizable amount of assets, it's, you're going to see your life ultimately change,
Right.
and, the way you kind of approach and having an idea that you need to get some assistance or some advice is probably the most prudent thing to do. That's kind of where wealth advisors come in, is they in essence help you set up those plans. They actually create a plan to possibly invest those assets, making sure that it is growing at a reasonable rate that's based on kind of the individual's situation and risk tolerance. So those are kind of the key things that I would say are kind of an immediate value, is actually putting the puzzles all the different puzzle pieces together, because when you do see the money in motion, you do get more complicating factors, like I mentioned. So I think that's probably the number one value add, is to kind of get a handle on everything and just answer questions and educate. That's the way I tend to lead in these situations.
Very good. Very nice. So one of the things that we briefly chat about in a fun ways that we heard the news that somebody won the lottery. They won.
Yeah, I heard that too.
Like $1 billion or something, and they just bought a $25 million house. And one of the things that you brought up during our conversation, which I think is a tendency of people to focus on depreciating assets.
Yeah,
that's really something. So for our audience, can you give us a distinction of what is an appreciating asset and what is a depreciating asset?
Yeah, that's also a great question. You're asking really great questions, Matias. So you came prepared. There's two types of assets out there, and there's a great book out there, that we provide this book out to a lot of our clients. It's called The Psychology of Money, and it's written by Morgan Housel, and I think it's a pretty popular book. But we provide that book for a reason, and there's a couple of things that I think it's really good at, how it frames things, which is like this whole concept of rich versus wealthy,
Right.
The appearance of rich is basically what you see on the outside, and wealthy is basically kind of that wealth, or that being rich without being kind of not being super transparent on what you have. I would say the depreciable assets are basically those things that are kind of in that rich category, which is like cars, which is probably the number one depreciable assets. I would say maybe like jewelry. Some jewelry can be considered depreciable assets. I guess it depends on the individual commodity, but any of those things that you kind of associate with being rich. And
like a yacht. A yacht would be a depreciable asset,
absolutely. And those are considered like one of the worst depreciable assets out there. That's what we consider kind of a depreciable assets. Appreciable assets are things that you're part of, the real estate world. Real estate assets are considered appreciable assets. I would say, equity in, whether it be a public equity in the stock market, or a fixed income like a bond, private investments, those tend to be assets that are kind of on that wealthy category, where you don't necessarily, nobody ever sees these things because they're considered like passive investments or so forth.
You don't flaunt them. You don't flaunt them when you go to a party. It's very difficult to go.
You're not posting on Instagram and showing a stock certificate or anything like that. That's just, Yeah. And even when you consider like having money in cash, like maybe you do see that in Instagram, where they have the bundles of cash, but they don't realize that inflation is really eating away at that purchasing power of that dollar, or that $100 bill that they're showing off. So, but that's basically what it is the two kind of dichotomy of assets. And
So when we have a life-changing event like a death, we know that there are some things that the beneficiaries you have the step up in basis, that the beneficiaries can take advantage of. So for our audience, we've spoken about this in other episodes, but this is the first time you're joining the show. The step up in basis is essentially that, the capital gain taxes that you would have to pay, when your parents bought the house for $50,000, now you're selling it for $1 million. The house gets reappraised at the value of the time of death, so you don't pay all that capital gains that is assumed to that. However, just like Andy brought up aptly, if you inherit a large sum of money, you have to do some tax planning. You have to do some tax planning because, first of all, what do you want to, if you put that money to work for you, you will have taxes. You're gonna, it's not like the tax money is just gonna forget about you because you inherit the money. You don't ever have to pay the taxes on the money you generate with those. You as a wealth advisor, my question is that something you have? I know you're not a CPA and we're not gonna enter the realm of the CPA, but are you conscious of future tax implications when you make an investment decision?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's one of the most kind of underutilized or underappreciated things is looking at things from a lens of, the after-tax returns, and I think that's one of the things that people don't realize, that there's going to be, Uncle Sam is always going to want his cut at one way or another. It really depends on the amount they're inheriting. It really depends on, like that step up is a really great point, because that step up is huge. And I think I kind of understand what you're leaning toward, because there's been laws that's been proposed of changing some of the step up basis, especially for like the ultra wealthy and kind of if you make a certain amount or a certain like size of an estate. Yeah, the step up is a critical one, and that's something that us as a wealth advisor has to be aware of, because it is a benefit to the people that are inheriting those assets, because, you see it all the time where the step up ends up being actually beneficial for, these beneficiaries, these trustees or trust beneficiaries, where they do get a step up. And a lot of times that's a huge tax advantage and a huge savings on their part, especially when they have to liquidate, whether it be the investments or real estate asset. It's huge. So yeah.
Very nice. Thank you. Let's talk about your journey briefly. Eddie, how did you get to where you are now? Let me tell me like where you grew up and how, when you were 5 years old, you're like, I'm going to be a wealth advisor when I grow up, or how the journey went from, when you born, growing up, and how you end up where you are now.
Yeah. It's actually probably an interesting journey, because I didn't have any ambitions to be a money manager or a wealth advisor or I actually thought I was going to be an attorney when I graduated from school up in Northern California. I grew up in Southern California, by the way. My parents were immigrants, first generation Korean Americans. They immigrated to the United States during the 70s, where there was a mass migrations of a lot of Koreans. They were just very typical of a lot of the immigrant stories that you hear when there's like a mass migration of a certain ethnicity. Stereotypical kind of Korean American business where, my parents bought a liquor store that we still own. They've been in that business for decades now. And I think for me, kind of the turning point for me is like when I did, take, I was about to sit for the LSAT and, go to law school. And this is when I was 21 years old. I kind of realized is that, the legal practice or the legal professional practice just wasn't a good fit for what I wanted to do. At the same time, I've always been kind of curious about, passive investing and just investing in general, just finding ways to actually utilize your money better. And this is coming from parents that like, they didn't necessarily kind of trust, the banking systems and kind of investments or anything like that. They, these were probably, family members that kind of put their money in the, under the mattress. That's kind of how they operated. And
Italians I didn't know Italians and Korean were so similar.
You know what? It's the same thing for, the Persian community. It's the same for like basically any other, like the Jewish community. Like, it's you hear these same stories from every immigrant community. There's this, that's just kind of what they did. And part of it is just ignorance and not knowing what to do. And so I wanted to educate myself on money. And a lot of that happened when I was kind of in the tail end of college and kind of beginning my career path. And I was getting really into finance and just investing at the time. And keep in mind, this was back in like when the tech bubble was happening, the internet bubble, the AOLs and the Cisco systems. So, around that same time, I was really getting into the stock market and getting an understanding of what it entailed. And once that happened, that was the end of it. I kind of knew my legal career ambitions were kind of
We're
squashed.
over.
Yeah, we're over. And that's kind of where I made that pivot into wanting to be full-time in finance and kind of educating myself. And it was a pretty, I would say those first 5-7 years were pretty tough because, this is coming from somebody that had a poli-sci background, and I didn't have a
Right.
finance degree. I didn't have a business admin degree or anything like that. I didn't have an MBA. So I really had to start from the beginning and kind of just gain the experience and kind of find out what my focus was. And the private client, the high net worth, money management was kind of my niche. I really enjoy building the relationships with these folks that were ultra successful and kind of learning from what they did and just kind of taking that knowledge. I've learned as much from my clients than they have of me, where I could talk about markets for hours on end and teach them about certain things, but a lot of times when I talk to these entrepreneurs and kind of business owners, the people that's really been successful in life, it's, to me, I'm kind of imparting that knowledge onto my clients now. So
Yes.
yeah.
Very nice. Very nice. I love that. Thank you for that. Okay, now we have a little bit end of the show fun thing. I have a list of 30 questions, and I want you to pick a random number from 1 to 30, and I'm going to ask you the question that is associated with that number.
Sure.
So pick a number from 1 to 30.
How about 10?
10. All right. If you could have an endless supply of any food, what would it be? Oh, that's a good one.
That's a really good one. I think that's easy. Could I choose more than one?
All right, we'll make an exception for you.
I would say if I was going out and it was an endless supply of food, it would probably be sushi.
Okay, me
just
too.
because it's ultra healthy. If you could get sushi and sashimi like on the demand, that'd be amazing. The other side of it is if I had to stay home, it'd probably be my mom's Korean cooking and
Nice.
the stuff that she cooks. That's one of the things I miss the most is Korean food on the regular. So yeah.
Very nice. Very nice. All right, let's do one more. Let's
Sure.
pick another number from 1 to 30.
Let's go with 27.
27 is a good number. It's a tough question though, Andy. You picked a good number, but
Okay.
a tough question. What was the last thing you regret buying?
The last thing I regret buying, man, that's a tough one because here's the thing. I'm a very calculated person, so like when I
lucky for you,
figure
man.
on something, I research the heck out of stuff, especially big discretionary purchases. So I don't regret a lot of the purchases most of the time, but
so this speaks volume about you. This is anybody that's listening. This is the kind of wealth advisor you want. Somebody who does it. Somebody who says, "Oh, you know what? I really regret buying those stocks that I purchased at $150 a share, and now they're trading at $5."
Yeah, actually, that's just kind of the left brain in me. So
That's good.
just being kind of an analyst, I guess, but. But yeah, I'm trying to think of something and some random purchase.
Yeah,
I mean,
the only thing that comes into my mind when I think of this thing is Amazon. Amazon. I mean, it happens all the time. I buy stuff on Amazon and then I'm like, why did I buy that? Or something that I put on my children's list. That's the worst. I put it on my kids' list. Think about this, Andy. I don't know if you have this happen yet, but they get some toy that is so annoying or make such a mess.
Yeah.
But you're like, oh my God, my wife just bought the kids kinetic sand or something. I tell you, man, that thing is everywhere, in the cracks of our couch, under our toilet. Like you find it everywhere, man. So I definitely regret buying that thing. But anyway, okay, great. So it's been a pleasure to have you on the show. Really, Andy, it's been so much fun. The time has flown. But before I let you go, this is very important. All of our audience who wants to get a hold of you, we are going to have in the show notes, there's going to be your contact info and social media profiles, but also some people just listening to the show, maybe on Spotify, Apple Podcast. So can you tell how people can get a hold of you?
Yeah, absolutely. So they could actually call me directly or send me a text, and my phone number is 323-334-6484. That's probably the quickest and fastest way to reach me. I would say the other aspect is you can always add me on LinkedIn. I do keep an active profile on LinkedIn, and that's a good way. It's for Andy Chong, wealth advisor, CFA, SEPA, that's the way you can find me. So
wonderful.
And that's it.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for being on the show. It's been such a pleasure. Thank you, everybody who's listened to the show. We will see you on the next episode. Thank you, Andy. It's been great having you.
You're welcome.
Bye, everybody.